Okay. Before I introduce our guest, I have a few administrative things because this is our first meeting of the semester, and because both orchestras will be meeting together in this format, it's really important that, especially for those of you who haven't been part of the online class, the format that's going to take place. But there's also a little bit of change of how we're going to interact with our guest speakers. So in the fall semester, we met with 12 speakers, and I asked for links or videos from our guests for you to view, and then for you to reflect and post questions. And then I would collect all the questions and use that as a basis for the conversation. But I think the feedback I've been getting is sometimes we don't get to all the questions. And I think I would love more participation from our students. So for each of the speakers coming up, I'm going to actually assign a small group to actually moderate. So you'll be asked to do a little more research. And I have to tell you my experience of hosting this. It's actually there's a lot of preparation involved in making sure you know who you're talking to and you know the speaker and their work. So all of that should be part of your process, because this skill of interviewing a person that's important in your field should be a skill that should translate to whatever fields you all go into. And all of you, not necessarily being a music major, I always try to find ways to find commonalities and skills that is transferable to whatever your field is. So I'm always trying to find that common points. So this skill I would like for you to have as well. So I'm going to be assigning small groups to be the main person moderating and speaking to our guests that are coming in. Okay. I've also sent out Canvas, so everybody should be on Canvas. And there are some modifications in terms of dates and locations and things like that, because we still do not have final approval of in-person mode that'll begin in March 29. But I'm hopeful that we're going to have a better success this time around than the summer. And I'm also working with Jody Zhu and Kyle Greenberg, who actually helped to calculate the distancing for all of the classroom spaces on campus. They're operations engineering majors, and they've been amazingly helpful in calculating the 12-foot radius that we will all need to be in Claremont Hall and Bailey Hall. So I want to give out a public shout to them, because they've, on top of, in this very busy time of starting the semester, they've been doing calculations and redrawing the spacing for us so that we can be in person in March. Okay. All right. So I'm not going to go through the syllabus or go through Canvas, but please do that on your own time, because all of that material is up there already. But without further ado, I'm going to welcome our guest, Titus Underwood. And me being a former oboist, this is an especially exciting guest, because I once imagined myself going into a career as a professional oboist, and I realized very quickly at Northwestern, as a performance major, I don't quite have what it takes to take on that path. So I chose a lesser role of being a conductor. So I hope everybody forgives me for that. But Titus Underwood is the principal of the National Symphony. He has also won last year the Sphinx Medal of Excellence for all of his work in advocating for representation and the exact issues we're going to be talking about today. And I'm already getting messages on the chats from people saying I always talk too much, so I'm going to hand it all over to Titus. Titus, welcome.
Hello, nice to meet you all. It's a pleasure being here. I look forward to diving into the topics and really get into the core of the matter of what we're going to talk about today. Chris, do we want to see the lift of your voice at the beginning, or we just want to go straight into the?
Actually, let's do that right now.
Okay. All right.
Good.
Okay. I hope you all enjoyed that. That was created, I think, back in March. Well, we put the recordings as far as taking the individual parts for me to ask for it to be commissioned back about April-ish, March, April. And then after that, we went into we actually started out as a group for a Strauss serenade. So that's why that setup is the way that it is. So the Strauss serenade in E flat major is actually 4 horns and the 2 bassoons, contrabassoon, 2 oboes, 2 flutes, 2 clarinets. So with me putting that together, then I said, I called one of my friends, Fred Honorable Sueke, who was an amazing composer, brilliant mind, one of the most brilliant people I know. Asked him, could he commission a literary voice for this setup? And first he sent me just the middle section that you had, the development section that you have in the middle. And he's like, hey, can you guys play this? I was like, it's not quite right for the medium, but let's meet in the middle and let's put the anthem at the beginning and then maybe at the end, and we have like an ABA type of thing. He sent me back this, and then I was blown away by it. And then my imagination starts going crazy with how this can be presented. So this was the second question that I had was, how can this be presented on a new stage called the internet? Instead of putting this as, let us film ourselves playing and put it on there, rather than let's see how meticulously the music was thought out. How could the video then reflect the music, and they work together as an art piece that's presented, rather than 2 separate things? So then I got the idea to start putting the pictures together, the color gradations, the setup, how it looks, the transitions, and direct it how it looked. And the crazy thing about it is I knew it would hit pretty hard, but I didn't know how far it would go. So as far as it going on to the internet, Facebook and Instagram wind up over 1 million something views in a week. It just exploded. But the main thing I want to drive home with that is that there was a quote that someone said to me. They said, you dropped water in a well that was dry. And the reason why I bring that up is it wasn't because it's just, hey, they're Black players playing. We've seen that a lot, right? Even seen it in classical music spaces to a certain extent. Black players playing Black music, the emphasis on Black composers, but the way it's presented and the cultural affirmation that's going on there, that means that there is a need and people want to see that. So therefore it's shared. Majority of the people who saw that didn't even know what Lift Every Voice was. How many of you know, just by lifting hands, know what Lift Every Voice is? Or what that tune is that's there? So that's another interesting point. So Lift Every Voice was written by, so it's John Rosamund Johnson. He and his brother wrote Rosamund Johnson wrote the music to it, and John wrote the lyrics to it. So they combined it as one thing. And this later became to be known as the Negro National Anthem. So that tune is sung in Black churches, at Black meetings. I grew up learning that tune. And one thing I want to talk about as far as I want to get mainly into the talk of equity and inclusion and the language that we use as it pertains to Black Lives Matter. So the reason why I want to be very, very specific in the language that I use, because a lot of times things tend to get lost as far as like the historical context of these things, right? In American history, a tune like this should be known within American history. How powerful it is that this is coming out of the legacy of slavery in America. This was written in 1899. 1865 is the Emancipation Proclamation. 3 years, 1868. Then Juneteenth comes around, where Texas finally lets its slaves go. Right. So there's a lot of historical anchoring that's in a creation of something like this that makes it resonate so much within a community. But what was even more specific about that is that you have to know the legacy of slavery, how it pertains to America, and who is that specific people group who represents descendants of slaves in this country, which this progress in America is always dedicated to. So this is how I want to frame it. And also, while I'm talking, I would like, even if people have questions and things like that, I want to be very, very interactive, because I don't like to speak. I like if you have a question, you have something you want to say or comment or something not clear, please, by all means, raise your hand or just jump in there, turn your mic on and say, hey, I have a question or something of that sort. So let's move on. I specifically want to talk about the progression in which or the direction in which America is going, and we'll tie that into music as well. And I'll talk about like how the historic tradition of Black music within America, and how we're talking about American orchestras, American music, and what does that mean? You know, and what exactly does that mean to us? So I want to, first of all, I want to talk about progress and what we mean by progress, because I want to frame everything before I get into it, because I think framing is absolutely important. And I want to talk about this thing, a quote from King. It's from his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? This was a book that was written after the I Have a Dream speech. So I Have a Dream speech is what King is known for. I have a dream that little boys and girls will hold hands and different colors, not by the content of about the content of their character, not the color of their skin. You know, all these quotes that people throw out there, like, this is Martin Luther King, we need to be more like that. But Martin Luther King, we have to remember, got murdered in America. You know, he was assassinated. So that means he wasn't necessarily well-liked. And why wasn't he well-liked is the question. Why in his last 2 years was King so aggravating to the American fabric that's going on? All right, because King wasn't just a peacemaker; he was an habitual agitator. So we have to remember that as well. He didn't mind marching in the middle of the road and shutting down traffic, or showing up at the White House with a bunch of people. You get what I'm saying? So it wasn't like this thing that we think it is. But he talks about this in his last book. His last book is his most blunt book, where he starts to become a little bit almost pessimistic of his life's work in a way. He starts to think, what is this I'm doing? And there's a famous quote by him that says, I think I'm leading my people into a burning house, because he started really looking for equity, or what the debt that was owed to the people whom he was fighting for. Because people were talking about integration, but with no resources. But integration with no resources means that it's not necessarily equitable. So I'm gonna read from here. It says, why is equality so assiduously avoided? Why does white America delude itself? And how does it rationalize the evil it retains? The majority of white Americans consider themselves sincerely committed to the justice for the Negro. They believe that American society is essentially hospitable to fair play and to steady growth toward an upper middle class utopia embodying racial harmony. But unfortunately, this is a fantasy of self-deception and comfortable vanity. Overwhelmingly, America is still struggling with irresolution and contradictions. It has been sincere and even ardent in welcoming some change, but too quickly apathy and disinterest rise to the surface when the next logical steps are to be taken. Like, really think about that. And what he means by logical steps, he's not just talking about, he's talking about tangible change. That's when hesitation starts to set in. They say, let's dream for an America. That's why people love talking about the dream state of King. I have a dream, because dreaming's fine. And dream may take a certain level of being sleep. Like, it's okay. I can dream and just keep it in my head. But when it's practical and measurable, there becomes resistance. Because then we have to undo things that have been put in place that set people in a certain place. All right. And I want to read another quote that frames before I keep going further. This is a quote from Dvorak. And Dvorak talks about how American music, he came upon this soil and they paid him a ton of money. It was like, can you help out the American, composers? We need your help. He's a great orchestrator and great writer. He's revered during his time. But Dvorak was known for being a very blunt speaking man, not a man of malice, but just an honest man, right? He just kind of spoke his mind. And he says to this reporter, he says, I am satisfied, Dvorak quoted to journalist James Kringland, that the future music in this country must be founded upon what are called Negro melodies. This must be the real foundation of any serious and original school of composition to be developed in the United States. Dvorak continues and says, these beautiful and varied themes are the product of the soil. These are the folk songs of America, and your composers must turn to them. And this doesn't come without backlash, remember? There's always a backlash that comes from this. There's a composer, John Knowles Payne. We don't even know who he is today, but apparently he was known at his time. He says this in response to Dvorak. Dr. Dvorak is probably unacquainted with what has already been accomplished in the higher forms of music by composers in America. In my estimation, it is a preposterous idea to say that in the future, American music will rest upon such an alien foundation as the melodies of yet largely undeveloped race. Really think about this and the framing of what we say and who is that undeveloped race. And what is Dvorak talking about? The soil of America. What is he saying? He's talking about American. He didn't just say, he said Negro melodies. These are American. And really think about how he puts those two together. American and the soil of America and the melodies that are there. So we're talking about soil of culture. That means that's something that's been there for a while. Something that has been developing for quite some time, where when people come and visit America, they can participate in a culture that's been there for a long time. You know, when you travel to foreign countries, say, look at these buildings, been here for a long time. This cuisine has been here for a long time. And we typically eat this at the time of the day, or we do this type of festivity. It's been there for a while. No one's necessarily traveling to go see the new buildings all the time in the country. They go to see the history of it. They go see the long-standing things that stood the test of time, and why are they still there? Why are these buildings still here? Why is Mozart still celebrated? You know, why is Beethoven still celebrated, right? Why are these? We can even look at the way everything is set up, the halls that we play the music in, or the shrines in which we play this music in, that is there to preserve this art form. So when America, when we're talking about America specifically and how it pertains to Black people, we also have to talk about the people who produce that culture and how's that culture created, right? So if you're talking about Americans, as Dvorak would say, you're talking about a new amalgamated group of people that are many tribes mixed into one that creates this new culture in America called the American Negro, or descendants of slaves, or what is now showing the legacy of slavery today, which is Black Lives Matter, Jim Crow, all these things. This is not an immigrant group. This is the only non-immigrant group that's here, that's tied to this. And this leads me into the point I want to go to. And when we talk about EDIB and equity and people of color and BIPOC and all these different names that we have, the name has changed a lot, numerous times, about how we go about things. Remember, there's I'm sure some of you have seen that image of the three people at the fence at the baseball game. How many have seen that? The equity and equality. And when I look at that, I say, okay, there's a tall guy, there's a short guy on two boxes, a medium-sized guy on one box, and they all looking over the fence. Why don't they just tear the fence down? Why are there boxes at the fence? And who's in the game that they're watching? Why is it them looking into a game? Who's part of the game? Who owns the game? Who had the permission to build the fence? And who lended them the boxes so that they can look over the fence into the game? Really think about the framing in which we think about equity. Because in America, a lot of times freedom had a price, a tangible price. King talks about in his last, he talks about come to get his check, right, at the end of his life. He talks about how many European immigrants migrated here to participate in getting free land, free grants, money to uplift themselves. So now you have this dissonance of when we look at backlash towards Black Lives Matter, you know, I say that Black people are typically philanthropically redlined. Where are people who always need to be given to? People who need programs in a country that Black people built? So we have to think about how this equitable thing comes about and how it gets lost in the language. And that's why I'm a big fan of really leaning into the specificity of people groups, not for division, but for acknowledgement. So if I were to say a statement like Asian Americans, right? If I make a blanket statement, there can be a large group of people, right? That's under that large banner, right? There are different types of people. Korean, there are people with Chinese, there are people with Filipino, and go down a list of different types of people. So when we say Black Lives Matter, yes, it is all Black Lives Matter that's here. But when King was there during that time of civil rights, in his last book, he specifically talks about the legacy of slavery. Now that pertains to a very specific people group. Dvorak's talking about a very specific people group. Negro Melodies is a very specific people group that he's talking about. And when I talk about equity, we started with equality, then we got to equity. But I said, now we're evolving into specificity. And where does that go? Whose America has damaged? And what is this American culture that we need to lean into that could be our cultural export? Because the reason why America did not take part in Negro Melodies, because it deemed it as less. The guy even talks about, you don't even know about the high art that we have. Dvorak has nothing about the high art that's here. The fact that it's high art, did not Bartok use folk songs in his pieces? Did not Mahler use klezmer tunes in his symphonies? That's the sacred music of cultures. The most sacred music can be the folk tunes of cultures. And what classical music does, it just expands that on a big, large scale where it's counter melodies and it's canonical and it's all these things that, are in the development of a symphony or a piece. But the reason why I even tell people about Black Lives Matter is what happens is within the equity talk or within the equality talk is that Black people become the fuel of diversity. We become the bones, literally, the blood that's spilled for the conversation to come to the forefront. So I tell people the conversation has been agitated because George Floyd died. Breonna Taylor died. They were murdered. So now this conversation is in the forefront. And then people saying, can we lean into that specificity, right? Because I want America to be very honest about its past, and that's the only way we can change it, is if we're very specific, right? So these are the things, these are the steps that we have to take to go further with the conversation, because diversity gets us in the conversation. But I would like to ask anyone here, just to get participation, what does diversity mean to you, that word? Diversity. Anyone can take that question. When I say diversity, what does that mean? I want you to really think about that. What is diversity?
Type it into the chat, everybody.
Absolutely. You can even type it into, absolutely. What does diversity mean? I want you to really, really think of a variety of identities. Okay. Representation from more than one group. Inclusion of people from all different backgrounds. Great. Not being the same for every inclusion. Absolutely. These are all great answers. Understanding and accepting differences. Absolutely. Active inclusion. I like these. These are great. The idea of diversity is great. It's amazing. Big fan. Huge fan of diversity. How many, and I'm going to ask you a question. Let's just take one continent, just for perspective reasons. Let's draw it out. How many distinctive languages do you think are on the continent of Africa? I'm not talking about dialects. I'm talking about distinct languages. Okay, someone says 300. Okay, can you have 100? All right. Let's get like 3 more guesses. At least 1,000. There are 7,000. Okay, 200. Yeah, okay, this is good. This is good. I like this. Okay, there are 1,600 distinct. I'm not talking about dialects. Distinct languages on the continent of Africa. You're talking about over 50 countries, multiple cultures. Is that not diversity? I really want us to think about America, how we think about diversity in America, because framing really matters. about how we move forward and how to fix the issue. So we're saying diversity, there's 1,600. If I took 10 different ethnic groups from Africa, from different countries in Africa, right? And I put them in a room, is that not a diverse group because they look phenotypically similar? Is our diversity a color-coded system? Whereas we have one person's dark skin, another person's kind of brown skin, a person who we may think looks this way and looks that way, and then we have diversity and we put it on pictures. There's a reason why pictures and stuff are so key in America, because it plays into our very, very almost elementary way of thinking about diversity. So when we're fixing the issue, what I ask people to really think about is lean into the history of America, because the existence of descendants of slaves is a direct reflection of white terror in America. It's a direct mirror of the existence, the survival of people who wasn't supposed to be here, who were only supposed to be here to work, right? But gave great contributions to America. And the reason why I want us to really think about that is that when I talk in things, I always say that I'm not doing a diversity initiative. Although I'm for diversity, I'm for different people groups, I'm for everyone being in the table, but that's not leaning into the specificity of where the harm was done. If any of you, maybe some of you are going to medical school, maybe you're going to law school, some of you, right? And you know, my fiance, she's a dermatologist. That's a very specific thing, right? And doctors get very very like agitated when you just say they're adjusted. They like to tell you what exactly they do, right? What specific thing they're doing, whether it's rheumatology or dermatology or emergency medicine or cardiology or whatever the case is. They're gonna let you know what you don't go to the doctor to check they take you to specific places to do specific things. And it's very vast how many differences go amongst, you know, some things. You could be a mole surgeon, or you could be someone who just a general dermatologist. There's even specificity within that, categories within that. So when I'm thinking about this it's not saying that Black Lives Matter doesn't mean we take this global thing and I want to make it local, American, because this is the place that we're in. And they say fix at home before you can fix anywhere else. And a lot of times in the conversation, we never really get to the root of the matter, because we know where the fuel comes from, but we never talk about what can actually fix it. What actually happens. I never forget, I live in Nashville, right? That's where my job is. And someone asked me, so North Nashville is where the Black people live, right? It's not the greatest part. It's a little rundown. It's been gentrified, you know, slowly but surely. Then I live in East Nashville, where it's very gentrified. I didn't know it was gentrified. I just moved over there because I was like, East Nashville's cool. It's where all the cool kids, all the hipsters live. You know, so I'm over in East Nashville and it's cool and it's hip and everyone's there. And someone said to me, why won't we just, you know, bring all the Black people from North Nashville to East Nashville, and then we just do it that way? And I said, how about you just give North Nashville the resources they're due, and then they can decide what they want to do with those resources. That's the difference. That's tearing down the fence. Tearing down the fence is knowing specifically, and that doesn't mean that America doesn't wrong other people groups. I don't want it to sound like I'm not in solidarity with other peoples of color, right? Or other non-white groups. But I want us and other allies, and there are plenty of white allies who've been there, who've been fighting for this cause. However, I do want us to be more specific with language. And that's why I read the Dvorak quote at the beginning. Because imagine American Orchestra. I ask American institutions this a lot. We have the AFM, which is like the American Federation of Music. It's the union that we have. It's American this and American that. That's where all the American orchestra, and the European tours where we go when you're at a top orchestra, right? We went to Budapest and with this place and with that place. And we play all this European repertoire. But are we American orchestras, or are we in a European approximate? Which one are we? Are we out-facing culture? What is our culture export out of America? Do we have value here that's been here for a long time? Do we have songs of the soil that's come out of America that Black composers have written that American orchestras right here in their land can be the experts on that, to be the cultural expert out to the world? Or do we kind of play Johann Strauss waltzes kind of good, you know, not as good as Vienna Philharmonic does it? Do we just keep copying that, or do we have something uniquely here? But what is uniquely here may be part of a people group that America has despised, that don't seem to be valuable. Remember what that guy said in response to the Dvorak: you don't know what the high class art we've been creating here. So you're going to ask those undeveloped people for their stuff? When you have William Grant Still, and you have Nathaniel Dett, and you have Florence Price, you have Margaret Bunge, you have Undine Smith Moore, all this beauty. You have William Dawson, who I think is probably the greatest American composer of all time, in my opinion. So these, because those were deemed not valuable, or if you use jazz idioms, they called it jazz, but if it's written down, it's classical. Jazz is an improvisatory art form. Classical is written down, you play it over and over, and you keep honing it. So with that frame, I want to take some questions for some people. If anyone have any comments, because I like to have the dialogue. I don't like to just stand on the podium and speak. But I want to open up for questions. Even Chris, if you have any question, anything that you would like to say.
I'm not going to take the first question.
Okay, isn't it true that a lot of so-called hillbilly music, which we associate with white people, was really largely a product of Black musicians? You know, for example, the banjo, its predecessor came out of Africa. I understand that many of the first fiddlers in colonial America were Black people that taught their skills to white folks.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yes, the name of the banjo, the instrument is called the inanga. So the inanga was actually the banjo, which was played on plantations. And and you make a great point. Yes, a lot of this, okay, classical music looks at this art form in its vacuum of itself. It's just disciplinary music. We need to come up with a different term somehow. But I don't know what the term is yet. I still use the term classical because that's the signal that lets people know what I do. If I say disciplinary music, I have to go and explain what it is I do. People are like, what is disciplinary music? It sounds like, I don't know, someone, it just doesn't sound quite right yet. But I think that, yes, these folk tunes and everything have been there, and people have been teaching these art forms. If you think about the dinners and things that people were at during slave times, there were slaves playing the fiddle in there and in the slave master's house. You know, a lot of these practices were already there. And another interesting thing I want people to think about, just to take this a little bit further as far as Black people, and I said in a new amalgamated group, people have to realize the reason why the culture of specifically, we're talking about descendants of slaves in this country, or so-called African Americans, is literally, it's multiple cultures and multiple tribes into one, which gives us diversity of different types of art forms and cultures. Because they wouldn't put the people on the same plantation with the same language, because that would cause a revolt. So it's literally people from Senegal, and people from Nigeria, and people from Benin, and all mixed into one that is forcibly put into Black people. This is a very different, distinct American group, which is arguably one of the longest standing, of course, aside the Native Americans, the longest standing ethnic American group in America. Because whites were recruited to be white. So the Italians were recruited to be white. The Irish were recruited to be white. If you were to fracture up all the white groups in America, it's a much smaller people group. It's a much smaller people group than what you call the American Negro, which is a block of people of 35 million here. So if you think about how American culture, if we talk about America, 1776, people have been here as an amalgamated group since 1619. Slave trade, millions of people here, or at least they say about 15 million transferred, about 8 million died. That's a lot of people when they had slave breeding farms in which they bred more slaves for the population to get larger. So imagine in the South when the Civil War is going on, people getting scared because the American Negro outnumbered whites that were there. So who's American? Really think about this. So yes, these long-standing cultures, as far as the banjo, which is the inanga, all these West African cultures that were here that blended into like this American gumbo, which caused this new folk tunes and country music, is definitely a legacy of that. Absolutely. Any other questions before I move on? Please, I encourage anyone to ask questions.
I guess.
Aiden, go ahead.
Yes.
Oh, I had a question. First off, thank you for coming. And I guess my question is, so I was noticing you were talking a lot about, how the banjo, it had a different name, but also how you were talking about, you described yourself as a classical music player, but when people, it's hard for people to comprehend that when you would say disciplinary music player instead. I guess what I'm trying to hear is that there's a lot of these labels that may not be correct based on, history. And I guess my question is, what would be a good way to try to go forward and sort of rewrite these labels to more accurately reflect where they came from?
Okay. All right. We have to talk about where the label classical comes from first. Just to, why is it called classical music? And let's dig into that. So context matters. So then we'll know how to upend it, right? The reason why classical music is so strong because the classical period is very much connected to, that is the peak of when, slave trade, colonialism, all this stuff is happening. The classical period is literally based off of class, highbrow, lowbrow music, which then goes into phrenology, which then develops into eugenics, as many of you are familiar with those types of things. There's a reason why this is held up as the highest, because for it to be classical, specifically classical, it must be white supremacist in nature, because that's when the classes start to actually be developed based off of race. So now we have this music that doesn't let anyone in, no one besides, and I would say even male supremacists in a way, that there's only white male composers, the epitome of existence, right? And classical music is even a lot of times thought about as just mental, like music that's very mentally thought out, much more mentally thought out and methodical than other music forms. So it has all these type of connotations. So that word classical is very, very strong because it has literally centuries of cultural signaling. And when we use a certain word or a symbol of a word that gets crystallized like that, when it stays in its place, it keeps signaling to people what exactly it is. That's why it's hard to let other people in, because the little root of the word is based off of something that is discriminating. That's why we change language in things. That's why language really, really matters. The best way we can know is, first of all, know the origin of this. Why is this called classical? Because is Brahms classical music? No, technically no. It's romantic music. Is Copland classical music? No, we would call that modern music. So is Schoenberg classical music? We'll call that serialist. Or neoclassical is people, or the new Viennese school. So we have different categories. Bach is not classical music, that's Baroque. The classical period is a very specific period where people wrote in galant style. It's a very specific thing. How did this become the umbrella term? It had to be linked to something greater for an agenda that was much bigger than just that period of time. It's what's being developed during that period of time. So at this point in time, if I'm being honest with you, I don't have the necessary word that we can change out for that, right? That's why we have to go into the history so that we can find the language. But we have to look it square in the face to find the language. Many of us have not looked into the history of it. We love, and here's the mesmerizing thing about classical music is that it's beautiful. We love playing it. We love hearing it. We just love the experience of the wave of sound. It's amazing to be in that sound, and it's mesmerizing. I love playing the Brahms symphony. It's amazing. But at the same time that I'm getting, watching this beauty of sound and emotion, I'm also culturally affirming something at the same time by the way that it's done. I'm not saying the composers, that was their intent. Now, Wagner's a different story, and Strauss is a different story. They're very specific about, that doesn't mean their music isn't beautiful, but they're very specific about their nationalism. That's a different thing. But as far as Brahms and other composers who just wrote beautiful music, people took that. And let me take a different term. Another way I want to turn this is we go to conservatory. Like I went to Cleveland Institute of Music and Juilliard, my master's, and we learned about classical music in different periods. There were whole classes on Bach and whole classes on Wagner, whole classes on Mozart. I'm learning the European diaspora of music. I'm learning diversity in European art. That's what I'm learning. Literally. I can't go in and play Debussy the same way I play Bach, or Bach the same way I play Brahms, or Brahms the same way I play Wagner, Wagner the same way I play Copland. Someone say, why are you doing that? That's a Bartok pits. But somehow this all became white. And it became just European, Western European music, or Western music, Western classical music. So you're saying that same type of diversity doesn't reside within different cultures of disciplinary music? Are you saying that the French actually got along with the English during the time that they were creating music? Come on. Do you think they felt some white brotherhood together when they were at war with each other, a lot of these countries in Europe? So let's think about it truly historically what it is. The contributions of, I play on an oboe, which is made out of grenadilla wood, which comes out of East Africa. This is in the height of colonialism, that literally the sound of an orchestra comes from different countries. The literal making of it. It's not so in a bubble as people like to put it. So let's dig that deep, figure out where it comes from, then let's get to the language piece of what we can call it differently. Because then we have conviction and the word will actually stick. The reason why the word stuck, because it has a deep rooted meaning. Classical means a lot. That's a deep word to unpack. But you have to understand the depth of that word before we can uphinge it, because then the next word needs to be just as deep, just as heavy, and just as thought out. All right, we have Sage here. We have another question here.
Yeah, go
Great
ahead,
question,
Sage.
by the way.
Yeah, hi. So my question is kind of in the process of being formulated. So I apologize if I'm not making a whole lot of
Oh,
sense.
no problem, please.
But it seems as though orchestra is a term that generally has a lot of like white European connotation. Like as we were just discussing, it was very pertinent. And because American culture and American music needs to evolve away from that, how would you expect it, or maybe want it to evolve into something of its own identity? So that we're no longer just American orchestras trying to emulate European orchestras or European music, but how can we, I don't know, like as the music industry evolve and redefine, I guess, the American identity of orchestra, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'll first of all, like how we want it to evolve. People, someone asked me, what's the future of classical music in America? What is the future? I get asked this question, like, what is it like being Black in classical music? What is the future of music in America? I said, the future of music in America is the canon is already there. The music just hasn't been played. And here's a very good point I want to make as well. We don't play Tchaikovsky's Third a lot. We don't play Mozart's Second Symphony. Anyone knows what that sounds like? Can anyone hum the tune right now? Mozart's Second Symphony. No one knows, unless some musicologist. The reason why I bring up that point, because we look for what I call the bangers of these composers, the best works. We present their best. I love Tchaikovsky's 4, 5, and 6, but I played 3, and this sounds like, like good graduation music. It's not great. We don't play, Brahms' Hungarian dances as his main focal piece. We'll probably play Brahms 4, Brahms 1, like his big pieces. Yeah, these are the ways we have to think about it. So if you're saying, what is the future? Mine the best pieces of the music that's already here. Find those curated program people say, can you create a whole musical season that's all Black composers? Absolutely. Just like I've done musical season of all white composers for my whole life in existence. I can find hundreds of pieces to program for years and years and years and years so that it doesn't fit in a box. And then people say, well, then you would just be putting things in a box to fulfill like a quota, right? But don't you fill quotas when you say we're doing a romantic period of music? We say, well, we need a piece of art. We need a Strauss piece and then a Brahms piece, and we have a romantic program. There you go. Let's do a Hungarian thing. Okay, let's do some Enescu and let's do some Bartok. Boom, we have Hungarian. We do that all the time. it's just not focused on the thing that we want to focus on, because maybe we have to think about, is that actually valuable to us? And I think that it has immense value once you dive deeper. And I would just rattle some composers. Look up Nathaniel Dett. Even his piano pieces in the bottoms. It's one of the most beautiful pieces. Look up Negro Folk Symphony by William Dawson. That's my favorite piece at the moment right now. Listen to Night by Florence Price. Listen to William Grant Still's Third Symphony and his Second Symphony, and also his piece Africa and Poem for Orchestra. I'm giving you like the gems of what they wrote, because even the best composers, Beethoven rewrote his music all the time. That's the future. We have to even catalog this music correctly, because there's a reason why you can go on IMSLP and Mozart's so neatly organized. There'd be money behind that. There's money that made sure that this music's preserved, well bound when you get it ordered from Bootsy and Hawks, and it looks so pretty in your little binder. There's money behind that. Same thing needs to happen for the composers that we should have been valuing here in America for centuries. Great question. Any other questions? Chris, you have any questions before we?
I'm hesitant to talk, but I think as a person who loved contemporary music all the time, I was always the weird classical musician, because wherever I went as an oboist, as a conductor, whether it be music festivals or auditioning for jobs, the fact that I loved and did so much contemporary music was a strike against me, because they wanted someone, a musician, conductor, who would delve in the known, as you say, the war horses. So I think that wasn't necessarily a white supremacist agenda, but the way it was, contemporary music was squashed as something that is not marketable, something that people don't want. I think that was just kind of an assumed stance that many people who in power that make decisions just took as an automatic default.
Right.
And I think so. Can you talk a little bit about how do we upend that expectation about market forces, what they claim as market forces? What the audience want is not a contemporary work, but actually it's Beethoven 5.
Right. Okay, so you bring up a great point. So Beethoven 5, let's say Beethoven 5, Dvorak 9, Carmina Burana, and the Messiah are like the pieces that most general classical people know. Let's just say those are the pieces, right? That if I program Beethoven 5, people will show up. If I program Carmina Burana, they show up to hear their 90 seconds at the beginning and their 90 seconds at the end of a 2-hour piece. Let's say that we do Messiah, where they have their Hallelujah chorus. If they sat there for 2.5 hours, they get to stand up, sing it together, think that's the end, but there's another movement at the end. Let's just say that that's what people come to hear. I play 44 weeks in a symphony orchestra, different repertoire every week. That has to be filled in with a lot of different stuff, which means that most classical music audiences only know what you show them. They only know what you tell them. So I can find the best pieces, and then they can just resonate with, like, we want to hear it again. Program that next season. This perception that everyone knows what the war horses are. No one knows anymore. Who knows? We have to think about early 1900s in orchestras, when orchestras were being founded, like Philadelphia, New York, all these stuff that have very interesting past. But let's just say majority of those orchestras, over 50% of them, were European immigrants. Is that the same makeup of American orchestras today? Or is it the majority of orchestras white, what people call themselves white, not their cultural distinction? Because when people came here, they brought their culture and their music. People brought French music, they brought Italian music, they brought German music, and they brought all these different music, which should be elevated, right? And that's what we do. That's how all this thing is stand. But somehow it became this white thing. And then that's the American thing. And the American thing, we don't know what that is. And so your audience, as long as you curate music that you know will speak to the needs to your audience. And also we need to know what the audience wants. Do we ask audiences or communities what they want? Or do we as classical musicians say, we know what's good for you, so you better listen to it and hear it? This Mahler symphony may be long, but you're bored because you don't understand it. Maybe you're bored because it's boring, or maybe you're bored because it's not played well, or maybe it's just great. Maybe it doesn't vibe with me that much. I am open to that. I'm open to someone saying that, you know what, this is boring. I'm cool with that. That's their opinion, but I do think that you can put together whatever you want to put together, as long as you connect with your community and let them know why this is relevant and why they're listening to it, hearing what they want to hear, and then culturally affirming them and reflecting them in the art that you present. That's what makes it a lot more tangible for today, that it will relate to today. We're in a museum culture of classical music a lot of times. We're in preservation, not innovation. We preserve. We're so stuck on preserving the same thing. Beethoven 5 is programmed every season. Beethoven takes up over 30% of orchestra music. Why? There's so many composers that write amazing works. I get it. I love Beethoven too, as well. However, the reason why things become canonized is because we play them over and over and over again. And the reason why audiences are shrinking, people say, well, that's been the case since classical music been existing. Maybe. But maybe it can become more relevant if you actually connect with your audience today, because art reflects life and life reflects art, and it goes back and forth. And we're always trying to pull up the same things. I think some things should absolutely be preserved, but not to the extent that we do it today. We can definitely go further as far as how we are presenting music today. Connect with, and many symphony orchestras are putting together EDIB committees and all this stuff where they talk about repertoire that has not been played, right? And I really want people to go further with that instead of just being a committee, because this is what happens. Committees get put together, but action's not taken because people are scared of that next step. That's why I brought up the King quote at the beginning, saying that people become apathetic once the next logical step is to be made. So I'll give logical solutions. Program your season with more Black composers. There's the Dawson symphonies, there's Florence, there's lots of composers. Consult someone and actually pay them for their consulting for the repertoire that they know that they've been a part of for a very, very long time. Ask them to pick up the pieces that you think can be exchanged, or the pieces that you think, like a Tchaikovsky 4. What is an equivalent of that from a different composer that would strike your audience in the same way? I mean, that's why people, do Pines of Rome and all this stuff. It strikes people in the same kind of way. Or the ending of Sibelius 5, but except the end kind of falls flat when it does those two notes at the end. Anyways, that's another thing. But I think that if you have a certain emotional reaction or a type of piece that you want in the program, you can change those out with anything. If I go on the random street and ask a random symphony goer, do you know what Shostakovich, 9 sounds like? They'd be like, I don't know. Do you know Shostakovich 5 is his most popular? Is it? We have to tell them that. That's why they come to pre-concert lectures and stuff. They come to pre-concert lectures so they can know what they're listening to, because they only know what you tell them. That's why a program knows. When you show up to a Cardi B concert, there's 9 times out of 10 or 10 out of 10, you may know the songs already. You may know the songs already to your most popular artists. Classical music is in a unique place that we can actually create things the way that we want to and be very meaningful with it. Any other questions before we go? I would love to invite any other questions or comments. Yes, Timothy.
So thank you, first of all, for coming. I'm an oboist myself, so I really appreciate hearing your insights. I found that really cool. But going off your last point with programming, right, with reaching out to educating the audiences about the works that we're playing that they may not know about, if you're not, say, a musician. Aside from that, how do you see trying to reconcile classical music with the modern internet age, where there's so many other genres, whether it's like pop or rap or things where it's just a short video? Like, Vivo, and there's other mediums where it's so much easier to get accessibility to these other genres. How do you see classical music, and also showcasing other composers? How do you see the genre changing, I guess, with these new developments?
You make a great point. This is something I actually want to talk about. So the internet framing means a lot. People okay, so I played in different orchestras who film a symphony being played. Think about this. They film the symphony being played. We need to get cameras in the hall. We need to be the next digital concert hall. Sorry, Berlin Philharmonic is the Tesla of that. They cornered that market. They do it probably better than anybody else does it because they've been doing it for years. So what do you do that makes you seem valuable, right? There was a time when music videos weren't a thing for hip hop. People didn't know what the artists looked like until they showed up to the show. There's a time when that was a thing. There's a popular artist, he just passed away, MF Doom, one of my favorite artists of all time. He talks about this, how he wore a mask because he didn't want people to see what he looked like. If you're going to be approaching the stage with classical music, you have to realize the stage that you're on. Context matters. And a ballet is someone said, okay, I'm going to write for the ballet. I'm going to write for people in the pit, so the orchestra could be a certain size. Dancers, we need to make sure the stage is this width and this and the other. They're writing for the space. Bach wrote for the church space. Wagner wrote for the opera space. These are written for specific places. What's written for the internet? Majority of people switch their screen after 12 seconds on the internet with competing content. So the thing, I'll talk about that as it relates to Lift Every Voice. I studied different videos, classical music videos, it's hip hop. I love hip hop, R&B, EDM, whatever the case may be. How do they present it? Because this music isn't necessarily better for visuals. It's just that they figured out a formula that works. Especially something like EDM, which typically doesn't have lyrics. So their show format is much different than a hip hop format, which is different from an R&B format, which is different from a death metal format. Their images are different. So how could you as a classical musician bring about pieces that are maybe short enough? I say the internet, we're kind of in the age of Eric Satie again with the internet. Eric Satie said, you know what? Mahler wants to write all these hour-long things. I'm writing 4 minutes and let you know that I can be just as impactful. I'm going to be known for these 3 pieces forever. And he wrote the 3 Genopedes, as we know. Beautiful music. Why don't we write for this space? I'm not saying it replaces live music, but when I talked to the composer about making Lift Every Voice, I said, the version that you wrote is not for the space that I'm delivering it. So could you write something for this space? Because I'm going to put images with this and create this into a piece. And then I deliver that. Then it becomes impactful. So that's Lift Every Voice written in a classical format. That's classical music. That's exactly what it is. I mean, for the lack of terms that we have, classical music, but that's classical music right there. That was impactful. And most people didn't even know the piece, which is even more, people only know what I tell them. So what I usually do is I'll take a piece and then I'll pair it with something, and then I'll look at it to make sure it's effective for the stage that I put it on, called the internet. So don't just film yourself playing. I'm going to film myself playing. That's cool too. I've done videos like that. People just want to see it, and oboe players want to check out. Like, oh, it's a nice tone. This leggato's nice. I wonder if this reed good. Like I get those questions. Can you send me reeds? I've got all kinds of crazy questions. But the point I'm trying to make is, if you want to reach an audience, don't look at them saying that, oh, they don't have a long enough attention span to listen to classical music. No, they're just paying attention to something different. They used to burn newspapers because people read them on the train in New York. Say they're not talking to people. Let's burn newspapers. So we're going to say that the internet, yes, there is unhealthy habits of people being on the internet too much. I'm not going to negate that fact. But People will pay attention. People still go to Netflix and watch movies, an hour, 2 hour long movie. People will sit down and watch the whole Lord of the Rings cycle. People will watch Game of Thrones a season after season. They're just getting there. They figured out what their audience needs. They actually ask what their audience needs. And the thing about classical music is so high art, right? That we're above what the audience needs. We know what the audience needs. See what the audience is engaging with. Meet them there. And the thing about the internet, it's not confined to space. Your audience, whomever you want to meet, is already there. And there's unlimited space. It's not confined to a physical place. Really think about that. Think about what you want to create with that. Oh, someone asked me here, could you tell us about explain some of the things that were done in particular for literary voice for the internet? Oh, well, I just covered that. And then, yeah, I'll cover that and I'll get to you, Lindsay. I see your hand is up. The thing that I did specifically for the internet was I saw that which was a really not crazy thing to me is that either the classical music video sounded really good and looked really corny, or it's really corny music that looked really good. And I was like, why is this an open market that you can look great and sound good and that hasn't been taken advantage of? You know, it's kind of like, you know, you get critiqued by the people who are in your field. That's the main thing, is that people are scared to put out things that people might not like. How's Titus doing that? Why is he on that funny outfit? You're not my audience. If I'm not looking for your response, you're not my audience. And maybe you are my audience, because all media is good media. If you want to critique me, you're just making me more relevant. And I already have the credentials to show you that I can play. So I'm not out here posing like miming or anything like that. So use your skill set that you have, all of it. And that's what I did with Literary Voice. I took some of the best players in the field, all of us together, and said, let's create this and make a statement for Black Lives Matter. Let's do a very strong statement, Black men and women together, and say that, you know what, we're tired of this police violence. Let's create something. And it spoke because it was relevant. And also it culturally affirmed people in their space. That's the key thing. And just the detail, one detail I want to talk about. There were about 4, and Lindsay, I get right to you. There were 4 versions of Literary Voice before I released it. I saw one was very brutal. It was like just the worst possible pictures I could find. I was just like, I'm gonna get the point across. I had fire in me. I was like, ooh, I'm so sick of this. Let me put it on there. And then I was like, let me think about this artistically rather than just agitating. And I said, you know what? The pinnacle of this is gonna be the kid's face on the police car. That's gonna be maximum intensity. You see that there. The gradations of gray shows you that I'm showing you juxtaposition of Black Lives Matter movement and the Civil Rights movement. I put it there so you don't know what time it is. That we're still stuck in the era of civil rights today, because we're still asking for civil rights. And then I bring it to color, of course, to show the quote unquote progress that's made, or the direction in which we should aspire to go. I really thought about the signaling of the colors, the timing of the picture. I went with the music, the arc of the story. Think it through before you present it. There's a lot more detail in there that can be spoken through image and sound. And also remember, people are consuming art differently because they're looking at it on screens today. It's more visually oriented in many ways. Lindsay, please.
Yeah, so I was wondering, in terms of music education, like in terms of technique, I was taught like Baroque technique and Romantic technique and classical, etc. And then, well, my high school orchestra teacher would program a lot of really like more contemporary music, diverse music. So we'd be playing Latin music, Balkan music, just kind of random things. And I realized like I didn't really have the skill set totally to be able to play this music. So I'm wondering, in terms of transitioning to more like American orchestra, what sorts of things would you suggest for technique education?
Technique education is as it pertains to Americans. Use the same measurements that you did to learn to techniques of the things that you did. You know, the research, the know-how, the nuance, listening to it, lots of listening. When I'm talking about, I teach a class called Black Music Discovery, where I go through Black music through Richmond Symphony, through a community school. And I go through many different composers, from Dawson to Blind Tom to all these people that's been in this space for a really long time. And I teach them, the reason why I give them context is that the reason why we're able to produce this music on a great scale as far as classical music is concerned, because they give us context in school. Like someone taught you the context in which that existed. Like, this is how this was phrased during that time because the instrument was like this. And you have a new version of that. So we want to try to stay pure to that with your voice being added into that. So when I talk to people about, say for instance, Negro Folk Symphony by William Dawson, and his first one talks about that disconnect from Africa, you have to know exactly what he means by that to know how to bring in the type of interpretation and artistry of expressing yourself to be able to convey that to your audience. So it's about doing the research on the piece. And anyone, and when I talk with people say, am I culturally appropriating by playing black? No. Are you culturally appropriating Brahms? No. Are you culturally appropriating Mozart? Are you related to him? Or do you identify as Austrian? Maybe you do. I don't know. I mean, do you identify do I identify as Russian when I play, Shostakovich or USSR at the time? Like really think about it. We're educated and we try to do the best we can with the education we know to be conduits of the art. Do that same thing with Black music as well. And be very specific about the Black music, because my friend Fredo, he's a Nigerian Ghanaian. So I have to know the music that he composes and be true to that. Being in America, I can say, I'm Black, I know how to do this. All Black people know how to do all kinds of Black music. No, I need to know specifically what are the rhythms and the harmonies that come from the specific place that he's in. So I encourage people to know, like, what is African-American music? What is this nuance? Same thing. Just deep dive in the study. And then once you deep dive in that would give you the information how to properly practice it and express it as well. And also educate others on it. You can become an authority on something that isn't necessarily your specific culture from study. And that's what we all do that do classical music. We become more of an authorities and people can speak on it because we've done the research. You can do the same with all genres of music and all cultures of people within this space. So, yes. And any other questions? Because I know we're coming to about the end of the time here.
I'm just going to jump in here a little bit. We do have to wrap up at 6:10, and I know some people have classes, the next class that they've jumped to. So we'll take a group picture at 6:10. We'll stay on the call until 6:25 or so if people want to stay and ask further questions, where Titus has generously agreed to do that. But I think we might sort of wrap up the official time now. And then please do stay on because Titus will be here. I'll be here till the end of the call and we'll talk. But I want to say just publicly, thank you, Titus, for such an illuminating time. I think one of the things that the big takeaway I have is your approach, your sincerity towards music making as a valuable way to traverse time and get to the core of that, what that person was meaning, right? So that we are all able to do the research and figure out what is the proper style, proper way of playing, and that really frees us to become much deeper musicians and artists. So we really appreciate your work and your wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you.
Everybody, let's turn your screens on, and we'll take a group photo with Titus. And then we'll go into extra sessions for any extra questions. I'll take 3 pictures like as usual. All right, everybody have your cameras on. Here we go. What? Nope. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording.